is Dugan Fraser. I'm the director at CLEAR. It's very, very nice to welcome you here. I'm very sorry to say that our colleagues from DPME will not be joining us this morning, but that's okay because that means we can say the hurtful things that we wouldn't have been able to say otherwise.
That's true.
So we're going to take it as a good thing, right?
We believe it.
So this is a really pressing and important conversation that we're about to have today. But before I go into it, I want to just introduce this notion of gLOCAL, which is a CLEAR initiative. As many of you know, but possibly not all of you, CLEAR AA, which is the CLEAR based here at WITS, is one of 6 centers. There's one in China, one in India, one in Brazil, one in Mexico, one in Senegal, and this one in Joburg. And we have a hub office in Washington. We are kind of an initiative that spun out of the independent evaluation group of the World Bank. And until now, the initiative has been running for about 8 years. And the 6 centers have operated relatively independently. But we're now in a stage where we are going to be trying to get a bit more of a harmonized approach and be building relationships between the centers. And one of the early ways of doing that is this gLOCAL initiative. And what gLOCAL is this unfortunately very ugly word, but it's trying to communicate the idea that practice happens locally and we share globally. And that there are a whole range of of things that can be done and that can be learnt and taught to start promoting a kind of shared approach that makes sense whether you're talking in China or India or Ghana or Kenya or Brazil or Mexico, so that we're able to start operating much more as a collaborative collective. Having said all of that, I wonder if it would be possible for people just to say their name and where they're from so that everybody knows who we're talking to. And can I start with you, ma'am?
Hello, everyone. My name is Tobeka Tukuzilis-Banyoni, and I've just come here from Newtown, and I'm with Pan-African Chambers of Commerce.
Morning, everyone. My name is Johnny Muteba. I am the CEO of the Pan-African Chamber of Commerce.
Excellent.
Hi, my name is Millicent Mabuta, and I'm with them.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Matshidiso Matsapula. I'm the marketing director of Tebele Project, but I'll soon be joining the Chamber of Pan-African Chamber of Commerce. Thank you.
I'm interested that we are drawing people from the private sector, because I think one of the things we at CLEAR want to be doing more of is work on private sector monitoring and evaluation. And so I look forward to us forging a strong tie.
Sure.
So,
morning, everyone. My name is Fezile. My surname is Shulai. I'm from the Road Accident Fund. I'm an M&D specialist there.
excellent.
Morning, everyone. My name is Inga Mdolo. I'm from the Department of Basic Education under the Research Coordination Monitoring and Evaluation Unit.
My name is Cara Walla. I'm the Twende Mbele Program Manager based at CLEAR.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Rabin Engel. I'm also with CLEAR AA, focusing on the parliamentary work. So our program is called Strengthening Legislative Oversight.
Morning, everyone. I also am part of the family of CLEAR AA, working on the parliamentary program.
And I'm Matozia Misi, and also with CLEAR AA and the South African Monitoring and Evaluation Association. And for those who have not seen it, but this is a collaboration between CLEAR AA and the South African Monitoring and Evaluation Association, because this year is also our conference year, and so we want to use this as also starting a conversation leading up to our conference this year.
Hi, my name is Megan Cook. I'm a researcher at CLEAR AA and part of the National Evaluation Systems Program.
Hi, my name is Makusazana Bambek. I'm from COPTA in the Strategic Planning.
Morning, everyone. My name is Takunda Chirao. I'm with CLEAR AA as well.
Good morning, colleagues. My name is Kutala Pangwa. I'm from the Gauteng Office of the Premier, Chief Directorate Performance Monitoring and Evaluation.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Alina Wyatt, and I'm the head of the evaluation practice at Genesis Analytics.
Good morning, everyone. Victoria Tully, Western Cape Provincial Government. I work for the Strategic Management Information Unit, and we're responsible for provincial evaluations.
And can I just please be corrected by Matodzi and note, of course, that this is a joint exercise between CLEAR and SAMEA in the run-up to the SAMEA conference. And we at CLEAR are in the business of building systems, and we understand the absolute core player in any country evaluation system to be the VOPE, the Voluntary Organization for Professional Evaluation, and that in South Africa is the role played by SAMEA. It's probably the strongest in the continent, one of the strongest in the world, and we're very proud of our association with you, and I'm sorry that I didn't mention that up front, so please accept that. I'm sometimes I'm a little clumsy in my enthusiasm, so please forgive me. Unfortunately, I am going to be in and out of this session. I've got a couple of things going on that I was unable to reschedule. So I want to be very provocative at the outset, and I'm going to be talking particularly to my colleagues from the state. And I want to kind of just throw a cat amongst the pigeons and see... Oh, was that something terrible? Are you okay?
Oh, it's just a banner, not a laptop. Sounded like it could have been
Well, it sounded like a piece of high-tech equipment, sure. Okay. When we talk about evaluation, we are really talking about a key element in public governance. And we are talking about a system that's intended to provide knowledge and information to inform decisions. And what has come up over the last 5 or so years is the use of this term evidence to capture what is supposed to be generated through monitoring and evaluation. And I just want to take a moment to reflect on South Africa's governance experience over the long haul and to reflect back on where we come from since we became a democracy in '94. And to talk for a moment about how evaluation as a component of public management has taken a long time to come into place. And when I was first working in government, there was this thing called non-financial information. And the very terminology explains to you what was going on. What was going on is that management in the public service in South Africa, in the public sector in South Africa, was a financial exercise. It was really driven by Treasury. It was about the PFMA and the Municipal Systems Act later. And it was essentially about doing financial reporting, and it was very much about making sure that you were able to account for the resources that had been provided to you. And later on, the idea that you also needed to report on your performance, which was this non-financial information and later became performance information, kind of grew up as a secondary outgrowth of this public management and governance conversation. Until around, I would say, 2004, the notion of integrating a whole range of different systems came to be popular. And there were efforts to integrate a statistical system, a performance reporting system, and an evaluation system. And that was captured in the notion of a government-wide M&E system. And that system, and it wasn't even really a system, it was more of a framework, was essentially dominated by the quarterly performance reporting, the annual performance plans, the annual reporting system that accompanied the financial component. And the notion of an evaluation element arose in around 2011. And so this idea of evaluation as being an element of our governance framework is a relative newcomer. It's, 6 or 7 years old. I think it's done a lot. But the thesis I want to propose to you today is that it needs to be tweaked. Because I think the original conception hasn't delivered what was intended. And I'm looking at you here, Alina, with interest as to whether or not, in the time that's passed since you did the evaluation, if you've had cause to reflect on what you said in that report and whether you remain of the view that was expressed in that document. And obviously what I'm referring to is state capture. And I'm having to really engage, in my mind, around the fact that the birth of evaluation in South Africa coincided almost exactly with industrial level looting of state resources and the massive impact that has had on our experience as a society. I mean, you've seen the data, you've seen the numbers, that our GDP is being cut by a third as a consequence of wrongdoing. And it wasn't highlighted in the evaluations undertaken in the NES. It wasn't addressed through the processes that were implemented in the National Framework for Performance Information. It wasn't addressed properly in the oversight institutions of the Public Service Commission. And I can't escape the need to have a reflection on where was it addressed. It was addressed in civil society, and it was addressed in investigative journalism. It was addressed in social movements. It was addressed in community-based organizations. It was taken up often by formations who were not progressive. It was taken up by formations that represented whiteness, that represented colonialism. How do we deal with that? How do we, as practitioners working in the M&E space, actually apply this key practice of adaptive management to what's going on in our own interventions? How do we say to ourselves, we seek to improve development outcomes, we want to play a role in good governance, we invest massive resources in these evaluation systems, which, let's be honest, are demanding. They're very demanding financially, in terms of human capacity, in terms of the energy they require from officials and others. How are we going to revise and adapt these systems in order to make them fit for purpose to meet what we come to understand the real governance challenges to be? Because if we simply continue to sell this model without revising it based on what we're experiencing, then we're not doing the very thing we advise other people to do. We advise other people to be responsive, to be adaptive, to be nimble and agile and fleet-footed, and to make the changes that are required to their interventions, and yet we ourselves are not doing those things. In the same way that we do not measure the impact of monitoring and evaluation. And so we've got a big challenge, actually. And it is nowhere more visible than in the national evaluation system. And so I think for me, the big question arises in relation to the question of personalities. How do we avoid making these systems dependent on individual human beings who drive their implementation through sheer force of personality, and make sure that they are truly and authentically embedded in the institutions that are responsible for them? Because that's why I do M&E. I don't do M&E because I love numbers. I do M&E because I'm committed to social change. And I would suspect that's true for most of us. Like, we really are social justice people who want to see a better world for ourselves and for our children. We understand M&E to be a way of leading to a changed world. That's really what this is about. I'm not in this because I like data. So how do we embed these systems institutionally, make them strong, integrate them into actual practice, and lead to better outcomes? That's the question. And what does that mean for South Africa's NES? Was that sufficiently provocative? I think it was. And I managed to avoid being ugly about anybody, right? So I'm going to hand you over to our chair human. That would be you, Matwenzi. You said it was fine if I pop in and out, and you will forgive me if I speak up and then disappear.
Throw a bomb and then leave it to see what happens.
So I hope you have a good day's conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dugan. I'm always averse to sitting down. Is it fine if I stand, Talita?
Yes.
Okay. And I think as Dugan mentioned, I think when we were in I do need a SAMEA banner. What do you mean? I even went to Talita, I'm like, as Dugan is speaking, I'm like, Talita, do you honestly think we can't move the banner now? And I think as Dugan was saying, when we were thinking about this conversation, and South Africa is also in a process of transition. We just had election and changes are happening within government, and it really kind of felt like a very important moment to have this conversation, because I think the national evaluation system has become a big part of the M&E ecosystem in South Africa, and in fact has influenced a lot of things that has happened. It has influenced even the work of SAMEA in the past few years. They've been an important partner to the work SAMEA is doing. And then it being conference here for SAMEA, obviously what's happening within government, what's happening in the South African National Evaluation System is equally important to M&E practitioners who form part of SAMEA. And so when in the morning when we were talking about potentially that we might not have the presence of DPM, we were wondering how do we adjust this conversation today? And in fact, as Dugan mentioned, he said maybe this gives us really an opportune time to really have an honest conversation, to ask probably ourselves difficult questions, both as an association, as M&E practitioners, as government M&E staff. So really glad to have Kuthala in the panel and Vicky to talk about what they've been doing at provincial level. What does all these things mean for us going forward? And then to have also evaluators who have been doing evaluations both for government, for DPM itself, but also for government-wide, in terms of what are we observing? What are the trends that we're observing in the country? But an important question that we are asking ourselves is the question of how all this work that's organized around the NES, how does it actually influence decisions that are made? What does it actually mean for citizens that we are making such huge investments in building the systems and having M&E units that are collecting data, that are analyzing data, that are spewing up reports after reports, that are producing evaluation reports? What does it actually mean? What is the benefit to society? What are we seeing? Are we seeing departments? Are we seeing government take evidence seriously? Are we seeing it produce different kinds of policies from before NES? And I think that's what we're going to get from the different panelists. So the way that we're not going to run the session today will be slightly different from what you have obviously from their agenda, in that we won't have a main presentation anymore, but we would just have our panelists talk to what they have done. I think everybody was here when they were introducing themselves. Okay, so Vicky is from Western Cape, and she's just going to talk about what Western Cape has been doing. Western Cape and Gauteng have probably been the busiest of the provinces when it comes to evaluation systems, and then taking that into a provincial level. So Vicky and then Kuthala are going to talk about what they've been doing outside of the national, what's been happening at a provincial level, and what they've observed, because both of them actually come from Premier's office. And then we're going to have Alina, who's a former board member of SAMEA, but also from Genesis, and has done a lot of evaluations for DPME and for other government departments. But quite importantly, they did an evaluation of the national evaluation system. And I think that's the point that Dugan was making about we need to know what is the value, and we need to actually know that from empirical process, not from just, that, I used to work for DPME, so, I spent a lot of time and energy And so I can be, because I'm so invested, I want to believe that what we did made a difference. But I think it's still important that we have that come out from empirical process. So Alina is going to talk a little bit about that and what they've seen from departments. And then we have Takunda. And Takunda's input is slightly different from the three in that it's not about South Africa. Takunda is part of the team that I used to be part of in CLEAR that works out on evaluation systems across the continent, in the Anglophone part. And so his reflections is really going to be what we are observing in other African countries that are taking evaluation policies seriously, that are instituting evaluation. Is that improving governance? Is that improving decision making? How is that being taken into? And I think in the room, so this is not just about having the four of them talking, because I think in the room you have a wide variety of experiences. I think Hermine and Linda's experience is quite important in this conversation because they deal with legislations, and then just seeing from that perspective. And then also Kara, who has worked with other countries also, so like Takunda, she's part of Twende, who Twende have been, can I call it a network? There's a network of African countries that are taking evaluation systems seriously. So they've been doing also a lot of research to understand, M&E cultures and systems in different countries. So this will really be now an interactive conversation. They will make the first inputs, but we will all be part of the conversation. So what I'm going to do is just hand over to the four of them. So we will start with, I think it makes sense to start with Kutala and Vicky, then to come to Alina, and then end off with Takunda. I won't come back after each of the inputs. So if you're okay with it, I'd rather they all just give their inputs, you absorb it, you take your notes, you reflect on it, and then we get into questions afterwards. Is that okay? Okay, so in that order? Sure. Great.
Thanks Ntutsi. Thanks everyone for giving us the opportunity to be here. So the Western Cape Government, in a nutshell, I'm going to try and be quite brief. So we are from the Office of the Premier, and we transversely drive the provincial evaluation system, which, as you know, came from the national evaluation system. So when the national evaluation system was established in 2012, the provincial evaluation system was established as a baby alongside it, and the Western Cape was a pilot province for that. And then being a pilot province gave us an opportunity to provide some inputs into the founding documents and to be part of the journey, I suppose, from the very beginning, and to inputs into the guidelines and all of the structures that were to make the system what it is today. So that was quite unique for the Western Cape, and I'm sure with some of the other drivers is probably why it has been institutionalised quite successfully to this date. Also, as Elena will talk to a little bit later, the Western Cape was a case study in the NES evaluation as an innovator province. And then as part of our involvement in the National Evaluation Technical Working Group, the Western Cape was also involved in the improvement plan for the National Evaluation System, which was developed, I think last year, am I right, 2018? And we were able to put some inputs in there, and then from that we were able to develop an improvement plan from the evaluation of the NES for the provincial evaluation system and implement some of the changes from the recommendations there, or at least try to implement them. Some things are easier said than done. So as I mentioned, we are in our 7th year of institutionalising. We have now completed 33 evaluations from our 13 departments, so we're quite proud of that. We have 17 evaluations underway. They really are underway. They're actually halfway through some of them.
She looks at me like they are.
No, it just, when we go to these conferences, all these numbers are brandished around 25, 70, 57, and I want someone to actually go and count them someday. So I did count them because we were coming here. So if anybody'd like to see the half reports, at various stages of implementation. Some of our departments have reached maturity where they're evaluating kind of almost just on their own. They're identifying and evaluating and getting really into it. But some of our departments still haven't done evaluations. We've got 2 that haven't done evaluations at all. We're still holding their hand and we're still encouraging them. We're still trying to do some advocacy work with them. But, it goes into the bigger conversation that why a lot of, in government anyway, evaluation seems scary. Maybe linked a little bit to what Dugan said earlier as well. Okay, so we're working on that. Also, linked to what Dugan said too, champions. We have some champions in evaluation, and definitely I put that down to our success. We've got 2 HODs who are absolutely incredible, who believe that evaluation should be deeply embedded in their planning structures completely, that they actually set up their strategic plans with evaluations in all the elements that they're working on the whole way through, and that's how they run the departments. You know, it's admirable. I'll talk to that a little bit later. But also in the Department of the Premier, we have a Chief Director who's my boss, who absolutely is passionate about evaluations, and that really makes a difference too, because anybody who's been on the evaluation road trips, you'll know, you'll see Zenat Ishmael there talking about our journey as well. We love to share that. So I think milestones for us and successes was in 2017, we decided to take on what was quite a big undertaking to link evaluations to planning and budget. A lot of departments were saying, we don't have money to evaluate. And then a lot of departments are saying, why should we anyway? So we wrote a guideline, and the whole idea was that through a relationship with Provincial Treasury and Department of the Premier, we would get some funding earmarked, because in the provincially we don't have money centrally to allocate to evaluations. And then some major big budget strategic programs could be identified, and then some of the funding would go to evaluate those, and then we would encourage the linking of evaluations to planning and budget. So how were we going to do that? So the money was okay, you give the money and hope the evaluation goes well, but how are we going to make this a useful, a beneficial evaluation, something where the evidence was actually going to make a difference at the end of the day? So going into the planning process, you know, our MTECs and our, which is our medium term expenditure committees, so our once back to money again, and then also in our APPs, we embedded evaluations into them, where when the departments got together to present their forecasted budgets, they had to talk about valuation evidence, its use, planning, future evaluations, and our Treasury held them to that. You know, and it worked quite well because it got it on the agenda. It got the senior people thinking about evaluations again in a different way. I mean, some people didn't even know what they were. You know, so like it just kind of got the name out there as a driver. The other area that I think was good for advocacy is our evaluation technical working group. So we have quite a healthy evaluation technical working group. We do meet quarterly. Sometimes we meet 5 times, but we just try to keep it interesting. We try to motivate and get the right people there. We try to invite interesting people because they do get quite sick of listening to us talking about our travels. So, and you know, that's been going well too. And the thing that we love about the Evaluation Technical Working Group is that we have, yes, obviously you want to have the senior managers there, you want to have the buy-in from the senior people, you want the message to get through as to what's happening in the evaluation space. But we also want to have the younger members of our government, the younger government workers listening and hearing about evaluation. It's important. And so we are delighted when some departments send their interns and send their new members of staff, be them M&E or programme people, just to hear about evaluation and evaluation evidence and how it can really work. So it's quite a vibrant group of people, and I must just extend an invitation. If you come to the Western Cape, please drop me a line, and if you'd like to join one of our meetings, and we'd love to have you there as well. We love to have visitors too. Okay, so that's about it. Then just moving on, yeah, another thing we did, a success, this year we appointed an external peer reviewer for our strategic evaluations, and I really think that has been a great step. We had a little bit of money from the Treasury collaboration to do that, and we were fortunate obviously to have quite a famous peer reviewer, Dr. Ian Goldman, join us for some work. But what it did for us having Ian there, I think, you know, that the model is still perfect, is to have someone who can assist us with capacity, internal capacity in the departments, but also to keep the standards high in the evaluations that are being undertaken. I just want to provide, I know we don't have a lot of time, but I just want to provide a little bit of actual examples of evidence that where evaluations have really made a difference in the Western Cape, actual real, true differences that were made there. So we did an evaluation 2 years ago on the Enterprise Content Management System, which is our electronic platform. It's almost like our Dropbox in the Western Cape government. And the problem was people weren't really using it and they didn't really like it, and some records management people didn't like the idea of electronic records, so we had to do a whole change management. But from the evidence, from the evaluation, the system was redesigned, a new business case and a whole new training session came out. So it really showed how that evaluation made a difference to quite a big investment for the Western Cape government, this electronic content management system, but also quite an important thing to get right. to have your data and your all your records in order and your documents. The other one that we just completed recently was a provincial transversal management system. All seem to be to do with transversal processes, but this is the system that our senior management use to structure their 5-year plans. So that, in the Western Cape we have provincial strategic goals. I don't know if